Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is Dylan's Dart Sport. My channel has grown a lot since I started this project. In case you're new and you're not familiar with the build, this is a 1974 Dodge Dart Sport Survivor car. This belonged to Dylan's uncle for many years. He inherited it and decided to put some pep in its step. This is a very original California car. I do think it has some touch-up paint and things like that, but what old car doesn't? In general, it's in very good shape. Don't mind the shop dust. Because it's a California car, this thing has bits of sheet metal us Northwesterners have never even seen before. Okay, my Demon does have most of this metal, but not all of it. The last tab on the license plate says 2006, which would seem to indicate this thing has been off the road for something like 2 decades. It's not exactly in perfect condition. There is this little boo-boo on the fender here, and there is a large area of touch-up paint on the driver's door that doesn't quite match. Otherwise, this thing is pretty straight and pretty nice looking. At least as nice looking as a beige and brown car could be, anyway. That's really the charm of this build, though. On the outside, it's a sweet Survivor. If there is such a thing as a sleeper, Dart Sport, Duster, or A-body in general, I suppose this would be it. Obviously, when we're done with it, it's going to have these big, ridiculous wheels, dual exhaust, and it'll sound like serious business, but it doesn't look like serious business with a quick glance. Those wheels are a bit of a point of contention, actually. They weren't Dylan's first choice, but his first choice wasn't available when he was ordering parts for this car. It's a 17-inch soft 8 from Krager, something like that. I still need to put the caps in the back. We do have a mild fitment issue to contend with on the front. We'll get to that. Anyway, the outside of the car still says Factory Slant 6, but everything underneath says Party. This is a Magnum-based 408 stroker with Edelbrock aluminum heads. Behind that is a TKX 5-speed. Note the TTI headers. That's a firm feel gearbox. The entire suspension has been overhauled. We've got 4-wheel disc brakes. We've got a Dana 60 rear end. We've got MSD ignition. All kinds of great stuff. When we last saw the car, I had finally gotten the TKX transmission to actually fit. It ended up being a lot harder than I expected, but it's in there now. The new cross member is secured to it. Everything there is torqued, and we're ready to proceed. If you watch my channel frequently, then you know I completely lack the ability to focus on one project. I keep seeing shiny things, and I want to do all of them. So this Dart Sport's kind of been sitting here neglected for a while, which is really unfortunate. It doesn't really even need all that much to be finished. I've found some new motivation to get the Dart Sport fired up and doing big smoky burnouts, and that is to take it to the local 8th mile drag strip. I've been running Dale's Demon there for the last few summers. I'd kind of like to stop doing that. And really, I'd like to run my Barracuda sometime soon, but it's not ready. Dylan and I have been discussing the possibility of drag testing this car for quite a while. You see, that stroker engine is rated for something around 450 horsepower, and we've got an excellent TKX 5-speed manual transmission, a strong enough clutch to hold the power, and that Dana 60 in the rear. This is a really stout drivetrain, and in theory, it should be pretty great for going fast. This is not a drag race-oriented build, however. This thing does have big, gigantic torsion bars and sway bars front and rear. Well, it doesn't now, but it will soon. The general idea behind this car is quick in a straight line, but really fun around corners. It's kind of a jack-of-all-trades, multifaceted build. And because of that, it most likely won't be amazing on the drag strip, but it should be fun. This should be a pretty interesting comparison to Dale's Demon. It's a similar package. It's almost exactly the same body, a 360 under the hood with the factory stroke. This is a budget-built engine that can't possibly make 400 horsepower. It has a 4-speed behind it instead of the TKX 5-speed, and it does have a better gear, 488 in the rear. It also has a drag racing tuned suspension. The drag strip in Bremerton opened for the season a couple weeks ago, so we missed the mark on that one. It's time to hammer down and get this car ready to rock. Essentially, what we have here is a brand new drivetrain bolted into a car, and nothing else. We need an ignition system. We need the fuel system finished. We need brakes. That would be really nice. We don't have any electrical to run the new MSD ignition system, and there's so much more to do. There's a lot of work to do inside the car, too. For one thing, we still have an automatic brake pedal. I've got a new set of pedals that came with the TKX to install. We need to finish the floor around that shifter. We need to get a steering column back in here at some point. And we've also got some performance gauges to mount. Yes, there are countless little projects to be handled all over the car. I hardly know where to begin, but I have to begin, so let's do that. So I'm gonna start here, vacuuming decades worth of dust and chunks of rocks. I don't know, all manner of things I don't really want in my hair. Look at all that metal. It's even got paint on it. Deleted the old speedometer cable. We've got a special one for the TKX. This one's slightly broken anyway. Bear with me here as I bounce between every single piece of this car, trying to figure all of them out at once. I've set the air cleaner in place to keep the big chunks out of the carburetor. Test fitting heater hoses. I think they're gonna end up routed like that over to the inner fender. I kind of like the look. I could try and sneak them down this way under the fuel feed to the carburetor, but I'm kind of worried that one ends up kinked going there. These late cars use one 5/8 hose and one 1/2 inch hose. I do have a 5/8 nipple in here. I was able to stretch the 1/2 inch hose over it, but I don't know if I'm gonna keep that or change it out for something else. Also, the bypass hose is kind of unfortunate. I had to give this thing a little bit of a twist to join the LA pump to the Magnum intake fitting. I wonder if anyone out there sells a hose that actually fits this application right. I deleted the engine and lighting front harness for a couple reasons. First, this is a 74 model and it has the provision for the goofy seatbelt interlock solenoid. We will not be putting that back on. Second, we're changing the ignition system here and I don't need any of this stuff. I'm gonna have to modify the earlier style harness we're putting on and get just the one wire to run the MSD, but it'll be a lot nicer to start with something new to do that. Oh, also the main power wire was fried, but that's pretty typical. You do have to pull the headlights to get the wiring out. You cannot sneak the plugs off of the back there. And even if you could, you can't sneak the new ones back on. That's fine because we're actually putting those fancy Holley Retro Bright headlights in this car anyway. This is our new engine wiring harness from M&H. M&H makes good reproduction stuff. They use all of the factory type connectors and plastics. They're very nice. Now this one is for a 73 to eliminate all of the seatbelt interlock stuff. It'll simplify my life quite a bit. Again, we also get nice, fresh new wiring in the deal, and I like that. Unfortunately, all 73s do have the provision for the electronic ignition, which we do not need here. So I am going to be thinning and simplifying and modifying this harness to suit our needs. Here's our shiny new factory type fusible link. Someone had previously replaced that with a length of wire in this car. If there had ever been a short in one of the non-fused circuits, it would have burned to the ground, probably. Glad to have that in place now. Now this harness is still a new part, and you should never assume that a new part is going to be perfect right out of the box. You do need to check these firewall connectors specifically to make sure every one of these pins is fully engaged. And on this particular harness, I've noticed something kind of annoying. The plugs are laid out nicely this way, which is great, except they go in the firewall this way. Let's talk simplification. Because we're using an MSD ignition, that entire system is self-contained. All we need from this harness to run it is one key trigger wire. That key trigger wire needs to have power when the key is on and also when the key is cranking. To do this on a classic Mopar, you combine ignition 1 and ignition 2. The way we'll do that is by bridging the ballast resistor connection. Except I don't want to just shove a jumper in the ballast resistor wiring like I usually do. I'd really like to do this cleanly. So what we're going to do is tear open this harness, trim these connectors out, and join those two wires. At the same time, there are some other things we don't need, like the factory electronic ignition control module wire. We also don't need an external voltage regulator because that is now built into the fancy tough stuff alternator. So this can go. Starting in 73, Chrysler added this removable section to the engine harness. Incidentally, 426 Hemis had a connector like that in earlier years. But 73 and on, instead of changing the entire harness, depending on whether it was a V8 car or a Slant 6 car, simply this section could be changed out. It would have the different length wire that runs to the distributor, it would have the coil wires, and it would have alternator wiring to suit as well. We don't need anything here. We don't need the distributor section, again, MSD, ditto the coil wires. We don't need this blue wire, which would have gone to an electric choke assist unit. We may reroute one to get to an electric choke on our new carburetor, but I don't think that's going to be in the right position. This is the wire for the factory oil warning light. We're going to have an oil pressure gauge in this car, and I don't think the light is going to be functional at all, so we probably don't need that either. Actually, we've decided to make the factory oil light work. This can just be a useful heads-up thing in case you ever lose pressure. You'll see the big red light in your dash, and you don't necessarily have to look down at the gauge at all times. I'll detail the process for installing both of these switches or sensors in a T in your engine in a video in the future. We will not be using the factory ammeter in this car at all, which means we don't need this wire that went through the firewall to reach it from the alternator. We might need this wire for the temp gauge, maybe, although again, we will have an aftermarket one as well. We do, of course, need all of the lighting stuff, so that section will stay as it is. I'm going to start the process by opening up this sub-harness, which I've removed from the main wiring, and grabbing that temperature probe wire. I will grab the oil light wire, we'll retain that. And we might keep that blue wire, although again, I don't think it's where we need it to be. To do this, I first removed a little bit of electrical tape at the end of the loom wrap here. And now, this wiring wrap that M&H uses, which is much like what Chrysler used, will just kind of unspool. I've built a lot of harnesses over the years, and I generally always fully wrap them with electrical tape. It looks factory, and I always have electrical tape at hand. I have been chastised at times for using that instead of this loom wrap stuff. The electrical tape does have a tendency to get a little bit sticky and obnoxious, and it's harder to get into if you need to make alterations in the future. But this stuff's really annoying to work with. I'm not a fan, and I don't even know where to buy it locally, so I'm probably just gonna keep using tape. Hopefully that's all right with everybody. Included in this harness, under the wrap, is a plastic clip that goes in the valve cover on the passenger side in the wiring loom holder. Of course, we don't have a factory valve cover or said clip, so there's no need to put that back. With all that opened up, we can now depin this connector. The male sides like this simply have a little clip that pops into the plastic and holds them in place. There's probably some special tool to do this. I could conceive of a bit that fits over these and squeezes the tabs together, but I'll generally do this with a pair of needle nose pliers. I'll go in and squeeze them at the base and just push them through. Carefully. Just a light squeeze. And it pops right out. It's just that easy. Now that is 2 ignition feed wires. One of those would have gone to the alternator and the other to that resistor for the electric choke assist thingy. We may yet use that. I'll figure that out later. I actually don't think I'm going to use this connector at all, because by the time we've only got 2 wires going through it, what exactly is the point? We could just make those connections directly and wrap them into the harness. A wild Alan appeared, but he forgot his beard this morning. Anyway, he's working on the brake conversion. We're gonna get that old manual brake master out. We're gonna get the automatic brake pedal removed, and then we'll see about getting some clutch stuff and a fancy brake booster. Anyway, back on the wiring, I cut the coating right here next to where the ballast resistor module and regulator wires were, and I unwrapped it all the way back. I've got this section separated out now. I'm basically going to remove this entire branch of the wiring harness, and I'm gonna thin this a good bit as well. With that done, now I can start depinning this connector. There is a special tool for this, but a very small, specially ground flathead can do the job as well. You simply slide your small flathead into this empty space beneath the female connector, and then you pull on the wire. Alan has elected to do the pedals the easy way by removing the entire box. Here are the fancy new pedals supplied by Silversport. These are essentially factory stick pedals. They do have an extra attachment point for the push rod that's going to go to our hydraulic master cylinder. These will go right into the old automatic pedal box. Essentially, the clutch pedal goes through the pin that retains the brake pedal and just hangs off the left side of it. On B and E bodies, there's an extra support bracket that goes out here. A body doesn't have that. It just sits in there. The new brake pedal is actually bushed inside with bronze to go around this pin, which is pretty cool. The original brake pedal used plastic bushings. This thing does have plastic bushings on the inside where the clutch pedal rod is going to ride. Before we slide these pieces together, we'll hit them with a little bit of grease for longevity and hopefully no squeaks. The new brake pedal is on, and that pin is retained with this little horseshoe platey thingy and a nut and a bolt. With the clutch pedal in place, it gets clipped here so it can't slide out, and that's it. Isn't it amazing how much of our brand new wiring harness is extra? I think so. I'll definitely be saving all of these bits for future batches though. I walk away for 3 minutes. I come back and the booster and master are going in. Look at all that clearance you get with the small diameter booster. As you can see, I've got the thinned harness set in place now. I'm sorting out the engine section and then the lighting section. I'm gonna get all of this routed and partially wrapped. I can't finalize anything until I know where the MSD box is gonna go. All right, that was just a dry run. We did determine we need to change the pedal rod out. They give you 3 different options. The shortest one comes installed in there. The longest one is definitely too long. The middle one looks to be just the right length to align our pedal where it originally was. And it should put it straight in line with the clutch. So we're gonna swap that out real quick. The hydraulic reservoir for our clutch is going to mount off of the firewall right there. Speaking of our hydraulic clutch, I'm actually going to mount this master cylinder to the firewall before the booster and master cylinder for the brakes are in the way. To do that, I've got to pop out that factory plug. That is the hole that the clutch push rod would have gone through if this was a stick car, but because it isn't, it's just got a little plastic thingy. Okay, all right, I guess I have to get a tool. There you go. Notice this master cylinder sits at this crazy angle. That matches the original down rod of the factory mechanical type clutch linkage. This is the inner plate that sandwiches the firewall on this side. I'm just kind of using it as a template to see what's going on here. On the outside, you can see the e-brake cable slightly blocks 2 of those bolts. Hopefully we can just massage it out of the way. This big hole in the plate essentially aligns with the factory opening, although it's not exact. Those 3 bolt holes are going to have to be drilled through the firewall so the fasteners can clamp these 2 pieces together. Having that plate there backs up the firewall. Hopefully it won't flex when we actuate the clutch pedal. Now I think this kit is kind of generic Mopar. It should fit A bodies, B bodies, and E bodies, probably more than that too, but I have found that this inner plate fouls on that lump in the firewall on the inside, so I'm going to take it to the bench grinder and just smooth that off enough that it will fit. I could take a hammer to the firewall, but I don't really want to do that. Actually, Alan's grinding on the clutch plate thingy so we can get that done, so we can get the booster back in, and I've hopped back on the electrical. Kind of. There are other considerations before finalizing all the wiring stuff, which I'll show you in a moment. But I do want to use this to illustrate a point. I apologize if the video is kind of a scattered mess because I'm going from thing to thing to thing to thing and then back. But that's what it's like to build a car like this. You have to consider all of these things in concert. When you're putting various aftermarket bits onto your car, they all need to fit together. They all need to go in the right order. And that can be a little tricky and annoying. Just understand, this is the process for the build. Consider every different component and try and get them to fit together in a cohesive way. Here's another consideration. To cool this stroked Magnum engine, we're using a cold case aluminum radiator, fan shroud, and dual fan kit. My preference is typically to use a factory type setup, and we could have gone out to find a correct fan blade and a clutch and a plastic factory shroud to match up to a radiator like this one, but ultimately, that seemed like too much of a pain when you can just hit order on this stuff. With the fitted shroud, I don't think the electric fans are a horrible idea, and of course there is a small horsepower gain there as well. So we've got to wire these up. Now, I don't have any fan controller or relays yet, and that is yet another thing I need to figure out. I need to get a fan controller, then figure out where that's going to live and how to wire that. For that reason, to continue my electrical project, I need to install the radiator. So I'm going to put all this stuff together real quick. The fans get screwed onto the shroud with these little L brackets that are included and the attached bag of bolts. And then that gets screwed onto that. We can drop it all in the car and that'll be the radiator done. Except of course that we have no hoses to connect it to our engine. There are the fans secured down to the shroud, 4 screws and plastic 90-degree thingies on each one. I did point the wiring downward. I don't know if I'll be running them both out the same side or if I'll put connectors on both sides, but I'll figure that out. Here's the shroud set in place on the radiator. I don't really like this gap between the two. If I just start closing that up with a nut and a bolt, that's gonna bend things. I'm thinking what I may do is start a bolt from the back side, put one nut down to secure that in place, and then a second one on top of the shroud. It'll space it up even farther, just like that. I don't think that'll be any issue. Every time with this guy. I was interrupted in my assembly of the radiator because I suddenly realized this is not a 22-inch radiator. That's what an A body should have. Then I looked it up, and this one is listed as fitting A, B, and E bodies. If it was a 22-inch radiator, yes, it would fit between those 3 body styles. But this one is very clearly configured to fit the 26-inch opening. And A bodies don't have that. Maybe toward the very end of production they got a wider radiator, but I don't think so. Although early A-bodies used a narrower opening, essentially all A from 67 onward would use the 22-inch opening, whether it had the smaller 19-inch slant radiator or the big 22. I said all of that to say this ain't gonna work, at least not without some modifications. This core is not 26 inches, it's only 24 inches. But that means the bolt holes are in the wrong places, and there will be some shrouding of the core by the factory opening. I didn't point a camera at it for some reason, but it did mock the radiator up in here, and it kind of fits. I sort of had to step on the radiator support down there to try and get it to slide down as far as it possibly can. And even then, the core sticks up to about here, and the original top mounting bolts in the radiator are like here. Luckily, there's an extra set of bolt holes, kind of, in the brackets that I could use. They line up here, and then the slide-in openings for the bottom line up like here. But it could be made to work. Alan's got the firewall adapter fully bolted in place with holes bolted and the piece inside the firewall for backing it up ground sufficiently. Now he's trying to get the clutch master to fit. It hits the inner fender, which is really dumb. Trying to swing it up into where it goes, it just kind of can't. There's an extra piece on the casting that he's grinding off currently, and hopefully that will help solve the problem. If not, we're gonna have to tap that inner fender with a hammer.
Still no.
Okay, hammer it is. You can see what we've got going on here. He's ground that to the point that it almost swings in, but not quite. So I guess we're hitting it with a hammer. Even with the light hammer tapping, it is still a very tight fit. Also, I think I'm gonna have to flip that fitting for the reservoir over to the other side. One is never excited to grind on brand new expensive pieces, but rule number one is aftermarket parts just don't fit. Better get used to that. Several rounds of tapping and grinding later, here's what we've got now. It does fit into this little recess we've created. I was barely able to swing it in there and get that bolt snugged. You can see it will tighten down and not be on the inner fender, which I think is a good thing. And yes, now there's a dent in our inner fender. Thankfully, it's very hard to see unless you know it's there. The backside of that dent is in dead, empty, useless space, roughly near to the cam adjustment bolt. That could have gotten in the way if it was a little further down, but in that area, I don't think it's going to be a problem. There it is, fully tightened down and plumbed. I think this clutch line is going to be free of any obstructions, and it should be clear of the column. It's well away from the exhaust, so I'm very happy with that. Need to get this brake line back out of the way. Now we just need a reservoir and a reservoir line, and we could bleed that clutch. The reservoir is going to end up right here, kind of behind the booster mounted off of its bracket at the firewall side. It'll go on top of the two nuts that hold the booster there. We might even have to use some extra washers for spacing. And then two more nuts will secure that in place. Then I just need to trim this line, clamp it on the bottom, and we'll be good to go. Now the booster and master are going in for good, probably. All right, slight issue. There you can see the clutch pedal is pulled all the way up, and with that mid-length rod going to the brake booster's clevis assembly, the brake pedal is much higher. So we're gonna have to go back to the short one, which put the brake pedal a little bit lower. That's really unfortunate, but that's gonna be better than this. You'd have to lift your foot way up to reach this. Alan sure is getting good at pulling this booster in and out. I don't know what size these holes were, but they weren't 1/4 inch. Anyway, they are now, and I've got hardware in here to mount the shroud. Here's the spacing we ended up with. You can see the issue is the fitment of that top piece. It's the same on the bottom. I don't know why they extend past the side so much there, but they don't need to. I guess it could have been cut off there so it went in and hit the fins, but either way, the gap here is pretty minimal and I think it's gonna be fine. I hadn't tightened the belts for some reason yet, so we did that. You can tell I got these sizes eyeballed right. By the way, they are right in the middle of their adjustment ranges, so are at least close to it. That's a 15475 or a 7475, I think, in Gates O'Reilly speak. On the alternator, 15375 for the power steering. Alan's currently cursing the day powder coating was invented. He keeps having to file and clean up parts so they'll actually fit together. Sure, it looks nice, but it's really obnoxious. I have wrapped and secured the lighting harness. I'm done with that. I do still need to finish up the ignition section, but this is good. Couple small annoyances. Turn signals. The original sockets were hardwired to the old harness, and for some reason, this thing has disconnects there. Now this is a 73 harness, and I would have figured that 73 and 4 were the same in this regard, but apparently not. So now I have a couple choices. Either I snip and hardwire them, or I go try and find these plastics off of spare factory stuff and add that so it can be connected. The other annoyance is one I've discovered time and time again, the parking light sockets. These replacement ones are kind of rubber instead of more plastic like the originals. They're supposed to slide into that light and turn. These will barely slide into the light and they won't turn at all. I don't know, maybe I'm not trying hard enough, but the good news is because they fit so tightly, I don't think they'll be coming out. Battery tray's going in. Note the horn's mounted on the bottom, and we even plugged that in. This car only has one for some reason. We wouldn't have painted that black. It's supposed to be body color, but it had already been painted black once over the years and kind of looked like crap thanks to battery acid. Looks pretty good now. Look at all these things that are happening. We've got a radiator mounted in the car. Of course, I did have to drill holes for those. I used 4 1/4-inch 20 coarse thread bolts. I put big fat fender washers on both sides. We've got the nuts up here. Just kind of had to brace these with a wrench and it went right together. It is almost as tight a fit to the fans on this car as it is on the Turbo Slant 6. But we do have some room here. Almost a finger to that bolt. Hopefully this doesn't flex too much because, well, yeah, hopefully it doesn't. Holley Retro Bright headlights. I've never installed these before because I hate everything modern and I fear change. But this is a pretty nice piece. It's a metal housing, a glass lens, I think. Hopefully glued together in a way that does not leak. These are LED lights. They're supposed to draw half of what the original halogens draw and put out like 6 times as much brightness. It's a simple plug-and-play connection, although remember that thing I said about verifying all of the connectors are clicked all the way into the plastics? One of the wires on this headlight was not. You can see it shoved out there, so I gotta redo this. Headlights, done. It looks like it belongs there. It's not so bad. It's a little shiny, but I'm good with it. It even almost fit in the headlight ring. You know, the mountain of empty boxes is getting a little out of hand. Just a little. One of those empty boxes is from a part I completely forgot we had. I was going through things on the shelf, and I found this one rear right wheel lip molding. The original had been dented. You can see the quarter panel's actually dented too, but it's not too bad, and the new shiny molding hides it pretty well. I did have to massage this to fit a little. Shocking, I know. Also, I need to get this wheel off so I can get the lower 2 screws. Battery installed and held down with a year 1 supplied reproduction battery hold down. You know, this battery is actually dated January of 2023, so it's almost 2.5 years old. It's a good thing I've borrowed this repeatedly to start crap around here because it's been charged many times and it's still good. I don't have any battery cables to attach to it. We'll work on that. It did occur to me today I'm going to have to add a radiator overflow tank to make this thing drag strip legal, and that's fine. It's a good thing to have anyway. I'm pretty sure the only space we're going to have to mount it is here. While I was messing around with other things, Ellen got the combination valve mounted and plumbed to our master cylinder. Note this crazy crossover configuration. Those are the lines that were supplied with this because the rear section of this combination valve is here, the front section is here, and on this master cylinder, which of course is not a factory Chrysler type, the fronts are actually on the front, the rears are actually on the rear, hence the crossover. On a Mopar, with disc brakes at least and a factory master cylinder, the connection for the front brakes is at the back, and the rear brakes come off of the front. Makes perfect sense, I know. Now, mounting the combination valve, which is often mischaracterized as a proportioning valve, underneath the brake master is pretty typical of these kits. We've got a kit like this on our 66 Cornet station wagon, and I put a very similar one on the toolbox Charger. Here's a diagram explaining the connections on the combination valve and an explanation up here on this sheet of why it's called a combination valve. This actually is one block that has 2 or 3 valves in it depending on the application. Our 4-wheel disc brake combination valve only has 2. A disc drum setup would have 3. In the middle here, there is a shuttle valve. What this valve does is shut off the fluid flow to the front or the rear brakes if there's ever a loss of pressure in either of those circuits. It is this feature combined with the dual reservoir master that makes this more modern brake system safe. Because if there's ever a loss of fluid pressure, you pop a line, you lose a wheel cylinder, anything like that, you'll still kind of sort of have some brakes. And at the same time, this switch, which is supposed to illuminate a warning light on your dash, will be activated. Now, the proportioning valve section of this block is here, located at the rear outlet section. What this does is delay the rear brakes application slightly to prevent lockup of the rear brakes. Now, this is only supposed to go into effect in a panic stop type situation. Typically, it won't be doing anything. I can tell you from experience that you really want to have this valve in place and functional on your front disc rear drum setup because sliding the rear end of your 1970 Dart Swinger toward a parked car is not a fun time. The additional portion used in a disc drum application is a metering valve. Essentially what this does is keeps pressure from going to the front brakes long enough for the rear brakes to start applying first. Again, this isn't supposed to allow the rear brakes to lock up first. The proportioning valve is there to stop that. But the combination of these two balances the braking from front to rear. Now there is also a component known as a residual pressure valve used in drum brake applications, and we do not find one of those on the diagram for the combination valve. Typically, that will be found in the master cylinder in the section that goes to the rear drum brakes, or in both sections if it's a four-wheel drum car. There are also external residual pressure valves that can be bought. I had to put a couple of those on the Studebaker when I did the disc brake swap on that car because of the way the master cylinder is mounted below the floor. As mentioned, there is a shuttle valve in here designed to cut off fluid flow if there's a loss of pressure in either brake circuit. You may have already predicted this, but when you're bleeding brakes to begin with, there's going to be air in these circuits, and it's totally possible for this thing to end up tripped, moved over, shutting off flow to one of your brake circuits. They actually include a tool with this kit that is threaded in place of that switch and locks the valve in place so it can't move. There are O-rings that seal off that center section so it's not possible to lose any fluid out when the switch is removed and this is spun in there. That's pretty cool. I've never used one before, but we'll be doing it here. Included with this kit from MP of the brake booster, master cylinder, and the combination valve were all of these fittings. These can be used to adapt factory lines, attach extensions to the factory lines, or these line nuts can be put on to match up to the various port sizes. We're probably going to end up using the small union and a small chunk of 3/16 to extend the rear line all the way up to the master. The T is included so you can connect both front lines to one port on the combination valve. There is no valving between the front left and front right. They're just plumbed off of the block out of convenience, and if you don't want to do that, you put the included plug in one side, you run one single line down to this, and then split both front lines off from there. I'm not sure which way we're going to handle this yet. I actually removed the front left steel line because I assumed it would be too short. Now I'm kind of thinking I should put it back on, but I don't know where I put it. I am going to be connecting that warning light circuit on this car so we can have a brake warning. The original switch and the replacement use very different connectors, so I've clipped off the factory style one, and I'll splice this one on whenever I'm done bleeding the brakes, I guess. I have just remembered I don't have a thermostat housing or a thermostat for this thing. That appears to be the Magnum setup where the thermostat actually sits down in the intake, not the LA setup where it sits in the housing itself. I think they're actually making reproduction Magnum thermostat housings because they're steel and they rust out. So maybe I'll just order one of those. I'm going to order a lower hose for the LA and a, 73 Dart or whatever. I don't know what I'm going to do for upper hose. I'll probably have to just find one on the wall. The factory LA hose would probably end up here, and that ain't going to work. It's days later for some reason, and that reason is I got distracted by a cheap pickup and a turbo. This is an MSD 6AL-2 box. This is the same unit I have on Dale's Demon. It works pretty well, and we selected it for this build because, I don't know, we needed a good ignition. It does have an adjustable red line, which is cool, and this also has a two-step. I'll be getting to that later. Rather annoyingly, this was an open box unit, and the wires that go to the battery for main power, main ground have already been terminated. The ground is way too short, even in this position, and I'm not sure it's going in this position. The washer tank is supposed to go there. It's been quite a while since I laid this out the first time, and I can't remember what my plan was. Maybe I was going to put it here, but currently there are heater hoses here. It could go there, I guess. It does fit neatly right here. That's kind of nice. Then I'll have to loop the wires over that way somehow. I could maybe put a holder right here. Either way, I'm going to have to extend this ground wire. I always thought that was a big no-no, so I called MSD after we got this. They informed me you can splice this wire as many times as you like, as long as it runs directly to the battery. The next annoyance, there should be an extension wire that goes from the box to the distributor, and we don't have that. I think I have one around here somewhere, maybe. I've got an electronic Mopar one. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's entirely possible I cut up the wire I'm thinking of for the Turbo Valiant. I did find one in Dale's stash. He obviously hacked this one up years ago to hook it up to a Mopar electronic. I could unhack it. Obviously, these are problems that can be solved easily enough, especially if you're a hoarder. And it's not a big deal, but I don't know, for what the MSD costs, sure would be nice if it came with all of the things that it needs to be usable, Somehow that cable ends up being exactly the right length to reach our distributor. Obviously this will get better wrapped and tidied, but now with that sorted, our wiring looks like this. The main harness is going that way. The trigger wire is that red one. That's what's going to get joined to the factory harness. This is the distributor connection. That gray wire is for attack, which we don't actually have. And the two wires here are for the coil. I'm planning to put the coil right where it is on Dale's Demon. And then the main power wires will be extended, run up here in front of the radiator and right over to the battery. I've zigzagged back to the cooling system. The heater hoses are trimmed, connected, and situated the way they're going to be. I did not have any new clamps in the heater hose sizes, so I had to scavenge some used ones. It would be nice to have pretty new stuff, but of course the pretty new clamps don't say USA on them. The lower hose is just a factory lower hose for a V8 application 74 Dart. And many others, I'm sure. I had to trim about 1.5 inches, 2 inches off of the top of it, and I did have to situate it carefully down at the bottom so that it was away from the belt. I still need to figure out an upper hose. I'm gonna have to make up a wire template and take that to the parts store, find one close on the wall, and we should be good. It's something I have to do pretty often when I'm putting these things together. I am not gonna use a flex hose. I really don't like those. This is that factory Magnum replacement thermostat housing. I want to point something out here. This is the gasket that came in the box with this thermostat housing. And this gasket is wrong. This is something I see often in the Magnum application. This housing has these little tits that locate it inside the gasket. The holes in the gasket are supposed to be oval to accommodate that. This one doesn't have it. This will not seal if you install it like this. If this is the gasket you have, you really need to take a hole punch or a similar tool and open these holes up so they surround those little tits. I have an entire bag of these. They've got the oval holes, but they are nowhere near the right size. Why do I have these? I have a set of these hole punches, and I've used these to solve this gasket problem many times over the years. Great for making your own gaskets too. Fixed. When it comes time to actually install this, I will probably silicone this gasket both sides. Thermostats just always leak. I spent way too much time making up a fuel line to go from our mechanical pump up here under and around the alternator to meet up with the Holley dual feed line. I'm going to be putting a metal filter right here. It'll have two very short chunks of rubber, but it'll basically fit just like that. Shouldn't be too much of a fire hazard. I would have tucked the filter down here, but there really isn't any room. Anything I attempt to put right there would probably end up cooked by that header tube, so we'll put it up top. It'll be fine. It is 3/8 coming from the pump up to the carb. That is mostly just for convenience because the dual feeds are always the 3/8 size. The line coming off the frame is still 5/16. That's not going to be any problem for this engine. It's going to move plenty of fuel. For some reason, I have almost every type of line bending tool in the universe. I also have the little just handheld loop thing. I don't know where that one is right now. This turns out to be the best. That one will put a 90-degree bend in 3/8 line with no problem. This one kinks it, and it won't quite get to 90 degrees. This one can be useful for quick little partial bends, but it's kind of hard to get a reliable 90 out of that too. This guy, and I have no idea where it came from, that's our MVP. Just now I took the power steering belt off because I don't have a pressure line yet. I also need to make up a return line, but that's no big deal. That is not happening. Not today anyway. We've got a set of the fancy pre-made MSD wires in red. These are 8.5mm superconductors. They're very nice. The coil wire is wrong. This is set up for a factory type coil, and we have the fancy MSD one, which I plan to mount right there, but they give you those fancy rubber isolator stand thingies. You have to be able to get nuts on the back side of those, and I don't think that's gonna happen. So I've got some things to figure out there. Maybe a bracket. Laying out the even side wires, I do need some separators, to keep these separate and also tidy. We'll tie them together like here, here, and probably up here, and that'll look really nice. Right now, it's just kind of a ball of wire. Yep, those sure are spark plug wires. Sorting through mountains of junk, I finally found a temporary coil wire and also some battery cable options. We are gonna need a couple of those. Working on battery cables now. Obviously, this is nothing like stock, but, well, neither is anything else in here, so that's fine. I've got two good solid battery cables. One is coming down to the big post on our relay. We're going to use that as our main power point. That powers the whole car. We're going to have charge from our Tough Stuff 100 amp alternator coming through a fuse holder to that point as well. I'll connect the feed to our electric fans through a module that was supposed to be here today, but I don't have yet. And anything else will be going there. The MSD I am going to run straight to battery, but I don't want 17 connections up here. I've got a second one going down to the starter, but the problem is this is like 6 inches too short. I really needed to run through this metal holder here to keep it away from the steering and the header tubes. So this is just going to be temporary for now. I'll come up with proper length cables and make this a good bit nicer at some point. Add this main ground to the list of temporary things because it's way too short to be routed nicely. A little bit of battery terminal tech for you. This is something I see done wrong all the time and it drives me insane. On these terminals, there's a little flat and the bolts that go through them have square heads. The square head locks against the flat so you can tighten and loosen the nut without the bolt spinning. See here on the positive side, this is one of those individual terminal ends, but it has exactly the same thing. And the factory terminals have that too. They use a little different style nut. In fact, that nut on the factory style cables has a little area like this, like a shoulder underneath the hex head. And I see them flipped around backwards all the time with the shoulder facing out. That is totally wrong. The shoulder is supposed to go in, so when it tightens down, you can still get a tool on it around the terminal. Well, I guess that answers the question, do we have power in the car? Holy headlights! Those are terrifyingly bright. Still don't have runner sockets. That's on the list. There's a lot of things on the list. Taillights work too. Nice. Side markers out though. In fact, I think they all are. Yeah, all of them. Weird because those are on the same circuit as the main running lights. Oh, I forgot we have this. That's fine. We'll use that later. It's not going to reach our temporary coil mounting position, which I'm sure will be 100% safe once this thing fires up. And now we've reached the part of the program where I'm completely out of time and I'm scrambling, tearing the entire shop apart, looking for one length of black wire. How hard can that be to find? MSD box is connected to the battery. If the key power circuit was powered up, which it will be in a moment, we should have a working ignition. Recall in a much earlier video, I preset the timing after pre-lubricating this engine when it was still out of the car, so we should be good to go there. I think we just put power to this thing, and as long as I got the firing order right, can't be too hard, it should make noises, which would be really great. I still don't have a starter trigger wire. I gotta figure that out. Yes, I'm gonna power up the ignition, pre-fill the bowls, figure out some way to crank the starter, and we're gonna hear this thing light off. Now remember, this is a Magnum. This is a roller cam engine. If this was a flat tappet style earlier engine, we could not do this. We would have to fire it off with a fully functional fuel system and a cooling system and keep it running for like 20 minutes. But because it's got roller lifters, we don't have to worry about any of that stuff. We could just hear it run real fast, and that will be a huge, huge victory. Not a lot of room down there, but I think I got it. Whoa, God. Hey, it's in gear. Why is it in gear? Parking brake. What a good idea. It does work. Proud of that. It's not in gear, according to the shifter, and it won't go in any gears. So I guess I get to pull the shifter section of the transmission off, which will be super easy, by the way. Yeah. Well, it's on a lift, so I lifted it off the ground, but a little nervous about that. Here's our MSD trigger wire, and when I connect this to battery, the little light blinks. The coil fell immediately, which is actually hilarious. I've got it set here on the intake now. All right, moment of truth. It's primed, starter, ignition. If anything goes horribly wrong or fluids start pouring out or there's a fire, I'll just pop this wire off battery and it will die. Let's do something clever like, this is clever. This is clever. There we go. Okay, watch your toes. It's kind of loud. Did you notice it teed right off? Sounded fantastic. Woo! Never you mind that puddle, that's brake fluid because we allegedly forgot one of the plugs in the combination valve, and that slowly dribbled out over the last couple days. Might have to rebleed the master. Anyway, nothing coming out of the engine. Fantastic. Of course, I didn't build this one, so I can't take too much credit. My ears hurt. There's a lot of stuff that still needs to happen, like so much stuff. And now we've got this whole transmission shifter messed up thing to deal with. But I'm still going to declare a major victory here. This thing sounds phenomenal. There's a whole bunch of stuff I can take off of this list too. There's a whole bunch of stuff I can't, but still. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I am getting excited. Oh, there's so much more to do though. That's it for now. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing all this progress on Dylan Start Sport. It is a running project car in need of a ton of other stuff, and we will get there. Anyway, until next time, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, can't dod the dart.